Joining us now is Tom LoBianco. He is the Washington political correspondent for Business Insider. Previously covered the White House for the Associated Press and Congress for CNN. He's also the author of Piety and Power, Mike Pence and the Taking of the White House. Tom, welcome to TYT.
Thank you, Cenk. Good to be here.
All right, so let's do it. Let's get into Mike Pence. So yeah. I want to talk about 2024, whether he's going to run, et cetera. I want to talk about the debate performance, but first, I want to find out who he is. So sometimes people write that he was a failed lawyer. I want to start there because it might really lead into his religiosity. What does that mean? Why is he a failed lawyer?
Yeah, he didn't really practice law that much. And I'll try to do a kind of a lightning round of Mike Pence history here. He grew up in Columbus, Indiana, went to college in Southern Indiana, tried a couple times on the LSATs, eventually gets into IU law in Indianapolis. And he practices kind of sorta for about 3 years, from like 1985 to 1987 thereother. But what he's really interested in is running for office. And I want to make a couple of key distinctions here because I've seen some other reporting about, people seem to think that Pence always wanted to be president, always thought he would be president. Back in the 80s, in 86, 87, when he makes his first run for Congress, he thought he was just going to be a congressman. That was his main focus. But the lawyer thing is not really, he didn't really do it. From the folks I talked to who knew him back then, he wasn't into it. He was not very good at it. I think he represented like some tow companies in some civil matters south of Indianapolis. But what he was doing most of that time, and actually it kind of created a problem for him and Karen Pence back then, because they weren't really pulling in any money, was he was campaigning. He was running for office. So, practical legal experience, not a ton. I mean, not courtroom experience, not by any stretch. Political experience, plenty.
Yeah, okay, so that doesn't sound like a failed lawyer. It just sounds like a guy who didn't want to be a lawyer. And that's certainly fair enough. And so, is he already religious at that point? And I guess what I'm trying to suss out with the lawyer question is the religion thing real, or is it like George W. Bush, political strategy? Bush was the most brazen, clear example of, I'll pretend to be religious so I could win because I can't win without that in Texas. But he had the addiction issues and he got, that helped him become more religious. So what is it with Pence? Is it real or not?
The funny thing is with him, what I found, and for the book, I actually spent a fair amount of time trying to understand his personal practice of faith as opposed to the political Christian right. And I tried to see those things as two distinct things. He struggles personally with leaving the Catholic Church, and you see that it takes him really 16 years from what he sees as his conversion experience in 1978 to 1994, where he really leaves the Catholic Church to go join an evangelical mega church just south of Indianapolis. But when it comes to the politics of it, we tend to see him more in the confines of the Christian right. Culture warrior, fighting over things like gay marriage, abortion, all these, hot button social issues. And as I did the research on this book, I really tried to understand him, his personal practice. I attended his church, one of the churches he used to go to up on the north side of Indianapolis, and just to get a feel for like is this fire-breathing Southern Baptist, Reformed Baptist style evangelical? Or is this just kind of like, mid-90s box store megachurch? And the answer for at least his personal practice was the latter. So for me, it created a big question of, all right, well, if this guy is practicing this way, then why does he get into the some of these end times discussions, where he'd start they talk about how they kind of hint at with people like John Hagee and Robert Jeffress, sort of the modern versions of Pat Robertson and Jerry Falwell. Why does he get into that stuff? Why does he even talk about it if he does not personally believe that himself? I mean, he does not come from that world. He doesn't live in that world, at least in terms of his practice. And I got one of his friends, I would say moderately toasted.
Yeah.
Pretty, there's a few drinks. And we were talking about this, and I just asked him, I was like, man, why does he do this? Like, he doesn't, I mean, as best I can tell from talking with people who know him, as best I can tell, he doesn't think that, if you repopulate Israel with nothing but Jewish folks and then rebuild the Temple of Solomon for a third time, that, magically Christ will appear in the second coming. And I'm sorry, I don't want to be dismissive of that. I mean, that's, that's personal faith.
Yeah, Tom, you can leave that to me. I'll be dismissive of it. But keep going. Yeah, okay, so does he believe in fairies and stardust and Jesus coming back after rebuilding Solomon's temple? The answer is a lot of Americans do. That's why you want to be respectful of it. I do a show where I'm allowed to give my perspective, and so I don't have to be respectful of it. It's totally cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. And we'll talk about that in a second as it relates to politics. But Tom, you're getting at the heart of it. That's why I'm looking forward to what your conclusion was, because it's not just Pence. I wonder this about almost all the Republican politicians. Are they genuinely nuts, or do they want to take advantage of and con the people who might believe it? Maybe they believe it for good reasons, even though it isn't remotely true. And maybe they believe it for bad reasons, but basically they want to con them into getting their votes. Both are bad, but I literally don't know which one it is.
For Pence, and this is what his friend told me, is that it's pandering. He said, I asked him about this. I said, what? There's deep concerns. There's very real foreign policy concerns about what this might mean for the balance of power in the Middle East, whether we're taking sides, whether it's starting to get into things like, nuclear war, things like that. I mean, it's all very sensitive stuff. And I framed the question to him that way. And I said, Mike Pence, who came up in the Dick Lugar political machine back in the 80s, and does in private at least seem to practice some measure of not normal, but moderate foreign policy, some measured foreign policy, and yet he goes and he'll give speeches to John Hagee's group, Christians United for Israel, which is a very, very powerful on the right. And I asked his friend that, and he said, "Oh, he's just pandering. That's what he's doing. He's just pandering for votes." And I guess that kind of shocked me, because we get you get one caricature of Pence that's out there, is that he is a, flaming ideologue, that he's kind of like the Christian theocrat. And frankly, I did not see that. When I was doing the research for the book, and we write about this a little bit, he says that he's a Christian conservative and a Republican in that order. But really, foremost is the thing that he doesn't say, which is that he's a politician. And you see that repeated throughout his career. So, as of now, he's on the Christian right. Could that change? Yeah, easily.
Yeah, I'm actually strangely comforted by that. I'd rather that he was lying and pandering and faking it than actually believe the end times theology. Because look, Tom, actually you shouldn't be reserved about it either. It's not like end times theology is not Christianity. It is something made up in America in the 1970s and 80s by a bunch of preachers about how they need to rebuild a temple and destroy the Al-Aqsa Mosque. There was no Al-Aqsa Mosque when the Bible was written. So it's just total BS, so-called interpretation of theology. But it involves Armageddon and World War III and billions of people being slaughtered before Jesus comes back. That is a very, very dangerous thought. And for the vice president to entertain that, let alone actually believe it. I mean, let me put it to you this way, Tom. If a Muslim believed that, in their version of that, that would be an issue in presidential politics, wouldn't it?
Yeah, easily. It's
Let alone if a politician said, "I'm a Muslim, a progressive, and a Democrat in that order," my guess is people will go, "Whoa, what do you mean? Oh, okay, so you're gonna run the place like you care most about your religion, Islam," and they would find that outrageous. Tom, aren't we soft peddling things because Pence is a Christian and we're afraid of offending other Christians? And if we were being honest, we'd tell people that end times theology is totally nuts and it's a real danger to the world if the vice president actually believes it?
Yeah, well, a couple of things there. Number one is for your viewers, I would urge them, and this is really, look, I was raised Catholic on the East Coast, because I'm a coastal elite. My family did not have enough money to be elite, but here we are. I was raised Catholic, right? I didn't know any of this stuff. I've never heard of that. The Revelation, that's a thing from an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie in the end of the 90s, like Y2K, whatever. Like, I didn't know any of this stuff. Very big in some parts of the Midwest, certainly in the South. Look, the thing about this, and I write about it in the book, and I tried to avoid it at first, and I guess you could say that's an implicit bias the other way, not wanting to see it that way. But I just kept on running into this, certainly with the creation of televangelism in the late 70s, the moral majority, when it becomes a political movement. I see it repeated. For your viewers, what I would urge them to go Google and check out premillennial dispensationalism. Dispensationalism. And just, Google will self-correct for you if you can't spell that one right. I think it's 2 L's and 2 N's on the premillennial. Dispensationalism itself, generally speaking, of the theology, is pretty well established. Certainly by this point in American history, comes over from Britain in the 1800s. Where you start to get into questions of like, okay, where do people fall on this? Do you think where there'll be a fiery end of the world? Will Christ return in the flesh? That's where the premillennial part comes in. So when you're Googling that. The other thing I would recommend people look into is go check out a series of books called Left Behind. It was written by a pastor named Timothy LaHaye. On the right, I think a lot of folks probably know who Timothy LaHaye is. It's spelled Lahaye. LaHaye is pretty well known on the right, probably not known to most mainstream Americans. And this he kind of serializes and dramatizes the actual revelation and then some of the prophets, Daniel, Isaiah. And I think in the remake, they made a movie out of it in 2014 with Nicolas Cage. When you look at that and you just go to the Wikipedia page, just get like a very cursory read on it, it'll help you see for the televangelist world why they like Donald Trump so much. Because for a certain part of that group, this is about bringing back Jesus in the flesh and the end of the world.
Yeah, that's right. I think the movie you were thinking of with Nicolas Cage is Ghost Rider. No. It's a negative Ghost Rider. Look, I want people to know it, and I want people to check out your book, Piety and Power: Mike Pence and the Taking of the White House, because it's no joke. A giant chunk of this country believes that Trump and Pence and others should be elected and reelected because they literally think they're going to bring Jesus back. And the way you do that is by killing billions of people. That is the most dangerous philosophy there is on the planet, and those folks control the nukes. So serious as a heart attack. All right, Tom, before I let you go, I gotta ask this real quick. 2024, Mike Pence is almost certainly going to run, one would imagine, whether Trump wins or doesn't win. Does he have any chance at all, or was he picked by Donald Trump to be boring vanilla guy, and hence boring vanilla guy does not stand a chance in 2024?
It's as I write in the book, in many ways, he was kind of foisted upon Trump by Paul Manafort and Reince Priebus, and that's a whole other story. In terms of 2024, I've been keeping a sort of a regular list of the prospective 2024 candidates for Business Insider. All the names we hear about: Tom Cotton, Josh Hawley, Marco Rubio again, Ted Cruz again. None of these people have declared. All very potential possible candidates. With the chattering class in Washington is talking about. And Pence tops the list. Pence is he walks into this, declared or not, as the de facto front runner. But what you get every time, at least when I talk to Republicans about this, is he's the front runner like Jeb Bush was the front runner. And I think that's he could walk into it at the front of it, but he's going to have to really fight if he wants to survive. Now, look, in Pence's orbit, they've always thought that the best way for him to win was to, two terms of Trump, ride the coattails at the end of that, be like an H.W. Bush type figure, try to ride out Trump's popularity. As it stands right now, that looks pretty unlikely. Could change, we never know. But all expectations are he is going to run. As I write in the book, he spent a long time running, really since 2008, behind the scenes without ever declaring. And a lot of people do that. That's not unsurprising.
Yeah.
So
when you mentioned in the beginning he just wanted to go to Congress, and then other people say he always wanted to be president. I got news for them. Every politician wants to be president. Okay, and every politician is a liar, which then leads me to not every, but almost every. There's now some progressives who don't take corporate PAC money, and so for the first time in a long time, I have to say not every politician. But that's why I want to end on this quick note here. I mentioned the debates earlier. In the debates, he said that he was outraged by Biden being in favor of NAFTA. When he was in Congress, how did Pence vote on NAFTA?
Pence was pro NAFTA. As part of the research for the book, I went and got some archival footage of two of his debates, 1990 and 2000. And he's up there on stage in 2000, and they pressed him. Look, his old district was a Rust Belt district. It was all these manufacturing towns just that ring Indianapolis. It's the auto parts feeder towns that would send their parts into Indy where they'd build them. And look, Pence was pro NAFTA for 16 years until he wasn't. I'll tell you a great little anecdote. If you guys remember the Carrier factory out in India, it ended up becoming a big issue in 2016. Pence was against giving, when he was governor, he was against giving them economic aid to help them try to either keep some workers here or to do anything really. And then Trump comes in obviously and says, "Oh no, we're going to do that." So afterwards, right after he was elected, right before the inauguration, somebody long time acquaintance of his walks up to him and asks him straight up. He says, "Governor, you oppose this." I was like, "But why are you supporting it now?" And Pence just slaps him on the back and says, "Well, we're with you now."
Yeah, well, there you have it. I agree. That's Mike Pence in a nutshell. There's this hilarious dichotomy that in Washington, politicians are the most respected people in the city. In the rest of the country, they're the least respected profession. And Mike Pence is a character study in why. Okay, Tom LoBianco, the book again is Pioneering in Power, Mike Pence and Taking Over the White House. Thank you for joining us, we really appreciate it.
Thank you, Cenk.
On the go, don't worry, we got you covered. You can still listen to TYT at our new podcast network. Find us on Apple Podcasts, the Google Play Store, or at tyt.com/podcast.